it's an important thing to let people feel like they're contributing, even if they're only there for the smallest job, to make them have a little bit of ownership, to make them feel like they're a part of it. And you know what? Every once in a while, someone might come up with a really good idea. And why would I shut that down? You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So there's something about creativity, which I think like even to have the courage to share your idea can be a scary thing, you know? But I think this whole idea of like, we need to give it, we must give it, because we're going to be giving it anyway in some form or another. We might as well just look at it in terms of how do I add value, not so I can get something, not so my ego can be patted, but simply because I think I have value to add. Let me add it. This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte.
Identifying your blocks and demystifying your struggles
so that you can claim your own path
and make your life a work of art.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to an episode, Way of the Artist. So this one, Evan, this one was a nice little discovery, I think, that we've had, and I'm really interested in exploring it. So we're going to call this one "Creating is an Act of Giving." And Evan and I just hung out for the weekend. Got to go see the guy live. We've been traveling afar for a while. Well, I suppose, and yeah, it was great. We had a good long talk, and well, I'll just say this, like if anybody's been following the podcast, you know, something that I've been working through in my own life is just the whole idea of what is my path? Have I taken a turn? Have things changed as far as like my creative pursuits and my artist life and where I actually want to direct my attention? And I've been in the film industry for over two decades now, making films, acting, writing screenplays, producing movies, all that kind of stuff. That's been my primary focus. And in the recent years, I've been having this kind of crisis of faith with the film industry, kind of going like, do I still want to do this? Is this still where I want to put my energy creatively? And if I do, how do I want to do it? And what does that look like? And why would I do it? And it's a back and forth thing. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, no. And then other days I'm like, no, this is exactly where I want to be. And it's totally what I want to do. But I think what we've kind of started to come to is this whole thing about the giving element of creativity and what creativity does and how that relates to why we even do it. And so I'm not gonna carry on too much further before I pass it off to you, Evan, but something that I really kind of reconnected with when we were hanging out last was this idea of like, why did I even get into the film industry? Why did I even start? Like, how did that even come about? And for me, I think I always kind of had a bit of a draw to the film industry. I always kind of wanted to, act and make movies, and I always thought that would be really cool. But what I'll just share a brief little story. I was actually going to be an architect, and I was in this advanced drafting and design program, and I was, gunning for scholarships so I could, be an engineer and all of that. And that was where I was going to direct my attention. I thought that's what I wanted. And then one summer I went away and I made a film, and that film got aired in front of an audience of a few hundred people. And it ended up winning the whole thing. And just watching everybody, that didn't even matter. It's just watching everybody laugh and have a good time from this film I made. I came home after that and I said, I'm going to be a film director. And I literally, I dropped out of this program that I'd worked so hard to get myself into. You had to have like straight A's, and I dropped out of it. And I just said, I want to make movies, and that's what I want to do. And that was about 17 years old, 16, 17 years old. And yeah, and I never really looked back. And I think like now I'm at this stage in my life where I'm like, okay, do I want to do this? Why am I doing it? And reconnecting back to that moment, it was really about the gift that it created. And I never really realized that until recently. And it's almost like everything's kind of come full circle. So I'm interested in exploring this. I don't really know where that's going to lead, but It's been quite an interesting exploration for us. So anyway, I'll pass it off to you, Evan. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting about this is, and it was great actually reconnecting with you in the flesh. I want to say that as well, because we had a lot of really great conversations, over the couple of days that we were hanging out, and there was a lot of things that came up that were connected and in different territories and things. And so this conversation is a bit of an amalgamation of a couple of things. And I think that there's some stuff in here that you're really interested in getting into around this idea of creating is an act of giving, or I suppose creating as an act of giving as well. And I think that much of what you're saying, as far, because there's some stuff that I want to get into as well in terms of, how there's an argument that creation itself, if we were just talking about creation itself, is something that is given. It's that is freely given, openly given. But so that's one aspect. Just to sum that up in a quick nutshell, is something that I'm very interested in exploring with this topic. But to just touch off on what you were saying, I think that any sort of creative life, which is, I think, everybody's life is creation in motion, is creativity in motion. And maybe you're not an artist, and maybe you're not in something that people consider creative, but it doesn't mean that there's no getting out of being creative in life. And it's something, it's a gift. The ability to create is a gift, and to be able to create is a gift. And I think that we go through these moments where we do have to reevaluate sort of what we're doing. And sometimes it can be very valuable as saying, like, you look back to, where did you start out with something? Where did you begin? What was the thing that made you come to do this thing in the first place, to get into the film industry, to make music, to paint, to sculpt, to make pottery, to blow glass, to to design sets, to they're all to get into fashion. Well, there's all of these, and we can extend that into anything that's done with passion. Like, why did you want to have kids? Or something like that. Why did you, all these other things in, like, why did you want to learn how to cook? Why did you want to, and especially because I think as time goes on, that meaning changes. And there are these moments that I think are a bit of I call them as like a crisis in faith. And something that I know that's a term that might be off-putting for some people, because there's a certain sort of maybe religious connotations there that freaks people out. But I think that in the realm of art, and to borrow the Frederick Buechner phrase that we've talked about on a podcast before, check that one out. That was great. Artist Wisdom Series, Frederick Buechner. But art is one of the few places left where we can speak to each other of holy things. And so by that, where we can still talk to each other of things that mean something to us, that connect us to each other and to our life and to this experience of life that we all share. Mm-hmm. Those kinds of things. And I think in that sort of endeavor in your life, there's bound to be these moments of where you have a crisis in faith in what you're doing. And very often that happens as a result of forgetting where you started out from, forgetting that I guess kind of innocent curiosity, what maybe just began as an innocent curiosity, or maybe you came in with, the with the blazing fire of 1,000 suns into something, right? And then, and now you're and you hit a point where you feel a little bit burnt out, where it's just like that, you don't have that same feeling, that same fire. And very often that is important to have that thing of like, okay, well, like, what am I doing with this? Why am I still here, in this pursuit, and finding out if there is something more to what you're doing. And so I know I've said a lot of things, but I think that one of those possible places where you get to, because I think when you're young and full of piss and vinegar, sometimes it's just like, like you're just going because you're just having a great time. I know, like for myself, like I loved acting, and that was enough. Like that was just like I just love this, and I have such a great time doing it. And sure, there's other things that enter into that equation. There was some ego in terms of like wanting to be famous and wanting to be noticed and that kind of thing. And there was some very, I would say, superficial conversations that I was a part of. Not that the people I was having the conversations were being superficial, but just myself feeling a little bit superficial in terms of, the meaning of being an actor, and kind of a sense of self-importance around it that wasn't really attached to anything. It was just more ego shit that you can just throw into the fire there. It's like, I want to be famous, and what I'm doing is so important. Not that it isn't important. I don't want to say, but like this egotistical sense of where that was coming from.
Yeah.
And, over time that shifts. Like those things don't have the same meaning. They don't have the same pull. And I think that that's a very valuable thing to do. And I think that learning to understand what you're creating as a form of giving, can be maybe not the place, but I think it can be a place that a lot of people arrive to in terms of understanding what they're doing in a deeper sense. So kind of went off on a lot of things there, Brandon, and to you, the audience, so please forgive me there. I didn't know if I was going to wrangle that one in. I'm going to be honest with you. I was just like, a lot of stuff coming in, hoping that it all comes together. I hope that did. So anyhow, Brandon, take it away.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we've done a pretty good job at trying to present what we're trying to get into here. And yeah, I think you raised some good points. One thing I just want to mention is when you're beginning something, and if you're younger, maybe you're new to your journey in whatever medium it is. I mean, you talked about acting. It could be really anything. If you're doing it because it's fun and you just love to do it, and that's getting you going. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think that you need to find some deeper reason as to like, what am I doing for humanity? And
sorry, not to cut you
I
off,
didn't say you were saying that. I was just
yeah,
saying
no. But I was gonna say, like, I because I'm hearing what, just in terms of what you're going into, is that's when you've got fire and passion and excitement for doing something, just go with it.
Yeah.
Like it's one of those, if it's not broke, don't fix it, kind of a situation. Go with it. But it's like, if you find yourself at a crossroads, it might be time to do a little digging. So that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you. And I think when you're in something for a long time, like myself, I've been doing this for, a couple decades, man. I mean, I've seen thousands of films. I've just been clearing out folders because, I've been, like I've talked about this a bit on the podcast. Something that has been very inspiring to me recently is, and actually it's been going on. I actually kind of did a bit of a what do you call it, an audit of my life over the last few years, and I realized that this has actually been going on for quite a while, a lot longer than I have been aware of it. But I've been on this very nomadic kind of journey, which has been really important for me. This whole idea of just not being not being so nested somewhere, being freer, having a more minimalistic lifestyle, stepping away from things so that I can get perspective on them. I've been doing this for a while. And I think, you know, when I talk about, oh, do I really want to be in the film industry? You know, for those of you who are maybe in it and maybe you can never see yourself ever asking that question, right? Because there was a time where I was there. You know what I think I'm realizing is like it's not so much that I don't want to be in it. It's just that I want to look at it from the outside for a minute. You know, and that's been part of what these last few years have been a little bit about for me. And it's a little bit scary because when you're in it, like a few years ago, I mean, I flew to Toronto and directed a film and, you know, and like that's what I was doing. I was like in it, and just before that, you know, I was like acting in movies and TV and things like that. In the last few years, I just said, I don't know if I want to, I don't know if I want to do any of this anymore. And that's a scary thing because it's like, but isn't this what you're doing? Isn't this the decision we made? You know, that kind of thing. But this nomadic kind of pursuit, what I'm starting to realize is that it gives me a chance to get away from the city. It gives me a chance to get away from the hub of the industry, which you got to understand, like I've lived in that pretty much since I was 17 years old. I moved out to the city and I lived in the industry for almost more than half of my life has been in the industry. And so, you know, for people who are new to this, it's it's a weird thing because I'm not quite a childhood actor, like a child actor, but I'm almost a child actor in the sense that at the first moments I really striked out on my own, it was in the film industry. And then I never really looked back until recently. And so now to have this kind of almost crisis of faith with the whole thing, I think has been a very healthy thing for me to kind of come back and go like, well, am I just in the film industry because it's comfortable, because I've done it for a long time, because I know a lot of people, because it's one of the things that I know how to do and whatever. And I think like what I realized when we were chatting this weekend, I mean, this has been a realization that has been building, don't get me wrong, but what started to kind of make me a little more clear was that over the years of being in the film industry, I lost touch with why I even did this in the first place. And I know if you're new and you're young, you might be clear on why you're doing it. But after you've done this for a while, man, it's like you meet a lot of people. You meet a lot. If you want to be in the film industry, first of all, like anybody, listen, if you want to be in the film industry, you're going to meet 5 to 10 times more people than the average person will meet in their life. And you'll meet in what most people will take them a decade to meet that many people. You might meet that many people within a year, and maybe in some cases within a few months. So the amount of interaction, the amount of things that are going on around you, the amount of pressures, the amount of just things that are happening is so incredibly consuming that there can be a point where you just get so spun around by everything you don't even know where you are anymore. You're like in outer space in this thing now, and you're just kind of on a spaceship riding out somewhere. You're like, I don't even know where we're going. I don't know what we're doing. I'm just trying to do this thing. And then all of a sudden you're like, where's home? Where was I going? What was the point of this? You know, who am I on board with here? You know, all of that stuff can happen, right? Which in some ways happened for me. And so like, I'm sharing this because I think it relates. In the beginning, I did it a lot because I loved it. And I think that was mostly what was driving me. But as I've gotten older, it's become more and more important that I don't just do things because I love them. And I'm not saying I don't do things because I love them, because I do, but it's like a search for meaning and purpose. And as I've gotten older, I think I've just started to think more about like, what am I doing and why am I doing it matters to me now. Whereas in some ways, maybe in my earlier years, maybe that was a simpler answer. Maybe that was just more clear. I don't really know. But what I have come to is that, yeah, like I I've built skills and I've built experience. And if I'm not really doing anything with that, then what am I doing? You know what I mean? Like, and not just in the sense that, like, yeah, I know how to make a film. Like, I know how to make a film. I've taught like hundreds of people how to make films, and they've made films. You know, I've made my films. I've done all that. But it's like, to me, it's not even about making a film anymore. And this was something that we were talking about on the weekend, Evan. It was like, the fact that you can make a film, like let me try to express this in the best way I can. The fact that you could go from not knowing how to do something that you're just like, oh, that would be so amazing to do one day, and that you could go from not knowing how to do that to doing it, and all the magic that happens in doing it. That's what I care about. And so that could be building a car with your father or your grandpa, or your mom, or whoever the hell you're building it with, right? But that could be that simple. But it's the fact that you could go from like zero to hero in an experience, and it's the hero's journey of it all that I'm more fascinated with. And if that means that I share that through film, that's okay. But I've started to realize that film is more of a it's more like a style of creativity that I like and I've come accustomed to, as opposed to identifying with that style, if that kind of makes sense. And what I think is when you're creating something, at first you begin doing it because you love it, but inevitably people start getting impacted by your creation. And that's, to me, where it starts to get interesting. Because in those early stages, it's like, yeah, well, do what you love. Yeah, that's pretty simple. But then you start doing it and you actually start doing it well. And then people start being impacted and it starts having an effect. And that's really what kind of, for me, that's really when I look back on my couple decades in this industry, it's the impact I've had and the relationships and those moments we shared. Those are the things that I actually care about now. And that's maybe that's maturity, maybe that's just like life evolution. I don't really know. One last thing I'll share. Me and your wife were talking about this at one point. We were talking about acting classes. We were in acting classes where we all shared, us and our colleagues, doing some of the best work we've probably ever seen in our lives. And no one else saw it but that class. And for some reason, that matters to me more than a lot of things. It matters more to me than a lot of the times I was on set or acting in this part that I thought would be such a big deal. But it was like these moments where we were, and this is another thing I just want to mention. Some of the people in those acting classes know us better, and we know better than their own family knows them. And that's a pretty incredible thing. You know what I mean? It's a truly incredible thing. And like what we were willing to give and to share in the pursuit of creating something great, to me, that's just such a special thing. So it has something to do with that. I don't know if I even have the answer on that, but that's why this conversation is so fascinating to me, because it starts out as something, yeah, I just want to do this. I want to do it well. I want to, I love doing it. But then, you wake up one day and you realize, well, this is so much more than that. I didn't even realize it. And yeah, so.
Well, yeah. And I would think a big part of that is that we don't really understand, and in some respects can't really understand the impacts of what it is that we're giving. We just don't have that. We just don't have that capacity, and that can happen at any time. As long as you're doing it, you're creating, you're giving it, and you're putting it out there, it's going to have an impact on some level. And I think it's just at some point you become aware of it, and I actually think that can become a bit of a, what's the word I'm looking for? That can become a bit of a minefield, I guess, or it can. There's some traps that can come with that, because I think that your work can start to take on a quality of self-importance, right? A quality of like, oh, I'm giving people this thing, as opposed to like, I always think that it's got to come down. It's still got to be connected to that sort of that innocent, that pure love and passion. And I think that there's just can be more awareness that develops around it. You know what I mean? Because, I was an image that just came to mind in terms of what we've been talking about. It's like those old, like the gold miners from back in the day. When people first showed up to, and started doing this, like gold was just fucking sitting up on the earth. Like it was just sitting on the top of creek beds, and people were just bending over and picking up chunks of gold. Right. And there was a lot to be had there. There was a lot of, wealth and abundance that was there. But once everything had been picked from the surface, everyone had to start digging down, right? And when you start digging down, you discover there's these fucking huge veins of gold that have been running underneath it that whole time, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, sometimes it's just not always as easy. You gotta work for it, and you gotta get down into it. But there's so much that you can tap into. You can tap into a deeper love, and a deeper understanding, through it. So, but I always think that like, you can never discount the love and think about deeper reasons as to why you're doing what you're doing. That can never hurt. But, at the same time, I also would caution against, if you just love it, let that be enough. Mm-hmm. Like if that's real and that's true, let that be enough, and let that thing drive you. Because I've also seen and experienced this thing of why are you doing this become a bit of a heady game.
Yeah.
And it can start to work against you. So, asking those questions when it matters, like is essential, because you're looking to tap into that vein again, right? Like it's, as opposed to, look, you're already, you've got all this gold already, it's like, and it's not really necessary for you to tap into that vein yet, because you're still giving this, you're still finding all of this lustrous creativity, at your fingertips. And there was something else here that I wanted to talk. Oh yeah. In terms of, something that you were saying made me think of, I'm not going to run everyone through this, but I do this exercise with a lot of my students, and I've even done this on the podcast before, but I have this exercise I love to bring to people that I just call like, why that? And really taking time to visualize, like picture sort of like a moment where you're telling someone that you love or admire or whatever about like what's going on in your life in the best case scenario, like what's happening, and just really picture that, imagine that. And then, so it's like, okay, so what is it that you want, right? Ask yourself a question, what do you want? And once you've answered that, then you ask why that, right? And then write down your answer, and then why that, keep asking why that until you can't go any further, right? And what I always love to connect this back to, because people always sort of arrive to this thing, the idea is to connect to that big, deep vein that's there. And that vein is not simply connected to, it's part of the core of who you are, right? Of your deepest values, your deepest want, and what you do. So if you're a filmmaker, if you're a, if you're a an actor, if you're a writer, if you whatever it is that you are, knowing that that thing is simply an expression of that deeper part of you. And not getting stuck on just that, because how you express in this life, in your life, and in this world is always simply a reflection of something that runs much, much more deeply. I hope I articulated that okay. I think I would like to, unless there is something else that you want to add to this, in terms of what I just said. But there's sort of another aspect of this topic that I want to get into, before we run out of time.
Well, okay. Let me just mention something real quick, I guess, before you do. I like the parable about the gold and how, and that's a good thing to remember, how it's just so easy to just pick it off the ground. And that's just kind of where it was at. And then, it wasn't until you had to dig that you realized there was these veins of gold underneath. And I think that when you're beginning and you're doing it and it's easy because you just love it and it's fun, and that's the early stages, I think, of anything really. I would say just keep in mind that when don't get too tunnel visioned on the whole thing, like in terms of the people matter more than you realize, and you just never know how. You don't really know what's going on. Like, you don't know all the gold that you're missing as you're just enjoying the riches of this easy thing to pick up and do at the moment, right? And so try to appreciate every person and everything that you meet, whether they were helpful or even, antagonistic to you. People are a really important part of the whole thing. And you're just not alone. And I think that's the important part to remember about the whole giving thing, is like, as much as you're doing this because you enjoy it, there are other people who are benefiting from you enjoying it, and or they're being inspired, or they're being whatever. And it's you don't even know what you're doing. Like, so example of this, right? I was at the gym. I shared this story one time, but I'll just share it again. So there was a filmmaker, well, a girl actually, was in an acting class of mine. And she came up to me. I was working in the gym. She was Brandon. I'm like, oh, hey, how's it going? She's like, hey, I'm sorry, I don't want to disturb you or anything, but I just, I wanted to tell you something. And I was like, okay. She was like, when you were off making your show, I found that extremely inspiring, and I saw you do it, and it made me think maybe I could do that too. And she's like, I just want to let you know that because of that, I went out and I just made my first film and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, wow. She's like, and I really like, I just want to tell you, like, thank you for going out and doing it. And I was like, I had no idea. I was just doing what I loved. I didn't know at all that this would have this impact. Now, she's moved on. She's like a pretty successful filmmaker now. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And somehow my little endeavor inspired her to go off and like pursue this career for herself. I had no intention of that. Like, that was not what I was trying to do. I wasn't, I'm not trying to even take credit for it. I just think it's an amazing thing that I was just doing truthfully what I wanted to do. And someone else saw that, and it gave them some inclination to go and venture out into that road themselves. And so this is the thing, is like, I could share countless stories over the years of things like this that have happened, where I'll share one more just to give this context. I remember this actor came in for one of the very first films I ever did. And I had this very beautiful, just gorgeous actress who was coming to step in as our reader. And this actor who was auditioning, he was a little bit of an oddball, I suppose, if you want to kind of call him. And like, and he didn't have great auditioning technique or room. I'd say like he didn't know how to do the room properly, right? Something about being green and new, like sometimes people don't. And he was edging towards her, and he was moving off of his mark and getting closer and closer and closer. In this moment in the scene where they're supposed to kiss, and in the middle of the scene, and I have this on recording, I'm like, don't kiss the actress. Because I could see the actress who was the reader, she was getting uncomfortable. And the whole room, I had a whole team of people there with me. And then he backed off, and then, and then it's fine, did the audition. And I remember thinking after that, like, oh my God, that was so awkward. I'm like, I'll never work with that guy, right? I remember thinking like that was so inappropriate. And then like a few years later, like I had evolved, I'd grown, I'd matured, and I remember thinking like, I'm like, give the guy a break. You know what I mean? Like he didn't know what he was doing. Maybe he was nervous. Maybe he thought he had to kiss her. Maybe like he just like he didn't know. Maybe it was one of his first auditions. I know my first audition was horrible and embarrassing if I think about it. But anyway, later I remember I had this role, and it was like not a lead role, but it was a pretty predominant role in the show I was doing. And I remember being like, man, that guy would be perfect. And he submitted himself and his agent got him in for the audition. And I remember being so excited to see him do it. And he fucking knocked it out of the park. And we ended up casting him in that role. And he was perfect. And it's like, you don't know, like we're all having an impact on each other. You know what I mean? And I think like there's lots of lessons in this, but it's like, give each other grace. Understand that if you're in this, like we're all doing our best. Sometimes we're going to make mistakes. Sometimes we might, whatever. But like, that was an interesting thing for me, because I literally went from that one of those first films being like, this guy, like so judgmental, and I say that, but then to being like, wow, like he's, you know what I mean? Like, and it's just interesting. We're all at the dance together, and some of us are awkward at certain stages of it, but we're like working it out. You know what I mean? And so like, there's more connectedness than we realize. I just wanted to kind of like bring that in, because there's this whole thing under the surface that you don't even know exists. And if you hang around long enough, you might just start digging that up. And it's pretty cool when you do.
Mm. Hey everybody, this is Evan, and this episode is brought to you by my book. Yes, I recently released a book called The Actor's Awakening, Connecting Spirituality to Craft. Expand yourself as an actor and your craft through a spiritual perspective. Take a journey that will explore universal philosophies and insights to help you understand human nature in a profound way, and develop practices to take your work to another level. Again, that's The Actor's Awakening, Connecting Spirituality to Craft, available on Kindle and paperback on Amazon. And as always, if you like the show, please subscribe. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
I like that parable about the gold. Is like, you're looking at it, like maybe at a certain point in your career. I mean, like, I think at a certain point in your career, you might be thinking, oh man, I really messed that up. I was horrible or whatever. If you're out there, but like, look, man, like there's so much more underneath the surface of who you are. And so maybe you just need to dig a little deeper. Sometimes it's so easy. You just pick the gold off the ground, but sometimes it takes a bit of digging, but then if you keep digging, a lot of the time you will find that there's something really great underneath the surface, and if you hang around long enough, you start to see that's really that starts to be what you end up looking for, and I think there's an interesting parallel with all of this is like, when we start out, yeah, we love it, the gold's all over, just pick it up off the ground. But as you hang around in it more, it's more about finding that deeper vein of gold. That's what it seems to be more about, at least for me. And I say that's true for a lot of people, but I don't know. Anyway, I just thought that was an interesting thing, and I wanted to bring that in. Mm-hmm. So where did you want to take it? Where was the other thing you wanted to bring in?
Well, yeah, I mean, I wanted to open up the conversation about, the nature of creation and creativity itself as being something that is given. That in fact I find myself a little bit hesitant to say this, but I kind of want to put it out there as a bit of a hypothesis, I suppose, because I think that there is something to it. It might not be entirely true, but there might be something to it, which is that it's not really creation unless it's given. Creativity, creation is not really the thing unless it is given. I'm just I have to sit with that one myself for just a second.
But yeah.
So go ahead.
Let's dig into this one.
Yeah. Let's dig into that one. So, I mean, let me just start off by saying something like this, and I don't want to be putting this out there with any sense of like, look, I'm not trying to make anybody believe in anything. I as much as possible want to try and just stick with something that we can just agree to on very basic terms, which is that if we can think and understand ourselves as an act of creation, right? I think that that's not too far of a leap, right? I don't think that's too far of a leap. Like we can say like, yeah, how is another question altogether. But here we are. We find ourselves here. We are an act of creation. We've been created by the universe in this world. Here we are. That is something that was given to us by no understanding of our own as to how that happened, without any understanding of whether we had any kind of involvement in that whatsoever. In fact, most of us have the experience of being, that expression of like being thrown into the world. Although our good friend Alan Watts would say, it's like, you were not thrown into the world, you came out of it, right? You were peopled into this world. So that was something that was given to us, and it was given to us quite freely, in a way that's very much beyond our understanding. And in that way, life is kind of like the most creative gift in and of itself. So as beings that can then go and create ourselves, is it also not within that nature that it also be given, right? Because now I wanted to say I am aware immediately of some things, because I do think that it's like, well, we can create things and never show it to anybody, right? There's huge bodies of work that people have created over human history that have never been shared or have been discovered much later, and then are kind of given to the world after the person is long dead and gone. So when these people were in the act of actually creating, even though they weren't giving it to anybody, was it not creation? Was it not creativity? So this is a possible wrench in my hypothesis right here. But but there is something about creativity in which it's like creation needs to be given. Like it's like there's something that's just, because there's almost the kind of tragedy, I suppose, in a way of creation that isn't given, I suppose. So it looks to me like you've got some ideas brewing in your head there, Brandon. So I'm going to turn it over to you. I think I've presented a couple of things, an argument and a counter argument to my own argument. So what are your thoughts? I'm curious.
Well, I had a second to think about it while you were talking, listening and thinking, and trying to be totally connected to what you were saying. But like, can you even help not giving when you create? Like, I think that's the thing that's kind of popping up for me is like, I don't know, when I was making my show and the actress came up to me and said, "Hey, like I made my film because I saw you making yours." Wasn't trying to give to her, but it did. So it's like simply by me doing it created something, whether I like it or not. And I think that there's a deeper message that's like unavoidably true here. And it's something that I think we like to pretend doesn't exist because I think sometimes it feels easier just to feel like we're alone in the universe. But the truth is we're all connected, and every little bit of every little thing we do has an impact on everything else, whether we like it or not, whether we want it or not. So when you're creating, you are giving something, and there's something in that. I think just to recognize that, like, if you are if you're doing something that's destructive, you're probably creating an impact far beyond the destruction that you think you're creating. And if you're creating something, I mean, you're also probably having an impact greater than you think. Now, like, how conscious do you have to be about it? I mean, I don't know if I'm sure about that, but I would say that, like, if you know you're creating, and if you're creating, if you know you're giving when you create, then why not maybe look at giving the best that you can give? You know what I mean? Like, um, look at how you have an impact on whatever you do, and this just makes you a more powerful, like, potent human being, right? Like, and the thing is like, there's a there's a recklessness with youth, and I think I can say this, as being pretty true, is that young people have no idea often the impact that they're having on the world around them. And sometimes older people too, probably quite often. But you have no idea what that is actually doing around you, because you might be just so focused on just trying to be happy, trying to do what you want to do, trying to figure out what you want to do, all of that. But all of this has an impact. And, I think about a lot of the guys I grew up with, and like, they all went and got regular jobs. And I was the one person that went and said, fuck all that, I'm going into the film industry. And like, I just did it. And all those guys I brought into the film industry because they actually came to me and they wanted to be a part of what I was doing. And I wasn't trying to give them that. I was just doing what I wanted to do as truthfully as I possibly could, but it was giving something. And so it was creating a path that wasn't available to the community that I was a part of. Was I trying to give them anything? No, I wasn't. I was self-involved and focused on what I wanted for the most part. I'm not saying that I was entirely 100% that way, but for the most part, I know I was pretty just focused on my journey and what I wanted to do. And, and those people just, they wanted to help me do it. So I said, yeah, come along. Like, you can help me do it. If you want to help, if you want to be a part of this, yeah, by all means, come join me. But I didn't think of that as much as like I was giving them an opportunity to go do certain things in their life that they might have otherwise not done. But that's what creation does. Is like, when you go and you create and you do something, it has an impact on everybody else. Everybody's watching, everybody sees you, and you might think you're the most invisible person in the world, and you're not as invisible as you think. I think that's another element of all this. It's kind of coming up for me. I think it's a matter, I think what we're talking about is that it's not a matter of if you're giving or not, because you're always giving. It's just, how conscious of it are you, and how much are you restricting what you could give for reasons that are not really, I don't know what the right word is, but like, sorry about that. That was my alarm. For reasons that are not, that are just not very, like, I don't know, like, true or whatever. It's like, look, like, you're scared to show someone something that you created, right? Maybe that's it. But like maybe you look at it like, instead of being so worked up about like, oh, I might get feedback and it might be hard to take and all that stuff, look at it like giving them a chance to help you. You know what I mean? Look at them as giving a chance. Like, Evan, you know this. Like, there's been a few times where I've said, okay, I've written a new script, and it was uncontracted. I just went off and wrote a script, and this happened for me a few times. And I just reached out to my groups of people, and I said, hey, I wrote a script. Does anyone want to read it? And I had people messaging me, can I read it? Can I read it? And then they would give me back feedback, and it was wonderful. And it's dawning on me in this moment. It's like, yeah, well, I gave them the opportunity to contribute to something. And that might have been more meaningful to some people than I even realized. You know what I mean? And that's the beauty of creation, is like you created an opportunity, and like people did give me feedback, and I did receive that feedback, and I took that in and I considered it in future drafts. It helped. And in a way, I think when you create, whatever stage you're in, there's something about there's an inclusive element, that can be kind of looking at it, as opposed to a self-involved element where it's like, oh, like, what if they hate my script? What if this is embarrassing? Could be thoughts that come through your head if you're, say, doing that. But like, it could also be like, hey, you know what? Like, I want to share this with you because I'd really like your input. I want to hear how you receive this, because that's going to help me make this better. And that becomes a very like almost validating thing for that person. You know what I mean? And it's a very inclusive thing. And so there's something about this talk which is kind of dawning on me. It's like, you know what? I think I really do love the inclusivity part of creativity more than I have really acknowledged. And those is one of the things, like, it excites me to bring people into something and be like, hey, you want to have a say on this? And one last thing, Evan, it's just popped in my mind as I said this. I had a rule on set. If a PA or anybody came up to me and they said, hey, I have just an idea, I wouldn't shut them down. I would just hear them, just so they could be heard. And it's like, it's an important thing to let people feel like they're contributing, even if they're only there for the smallest job, to make them have a little bit of ownership, to make them feel like they're a part of it. And you know what? Every once in a while, someone might come up with a really good idea. And why would I shut that down? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So there's something about creativity, which I think, like, even to have the courage to share your idea can be a scary thing, But I think this whole idea of like, we need to give it, we must give it, because we're going to be giving it anyway in some form or another. We might as well just look at it in terms of, how do I add value? Not so I can get something, not so my ego can be patted, but simply because I think I have value to add, let me add it.
Yeah. I think that something that's occurring to me is that, a good question is, for who or of whom is this being given to? And another word that came to mind was actually offering, which isn't necessarily a word that we might necessarily think of when it comes to, sharing our work, sharing our passion with people. But there's something I like about this word offering when it comes to this. Because there's something very open and gracious and humble about the idea of an offering, right? I offer this to you, whether you will accept it or not. I offer it to you,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm anyone who's listened to the podcast knows that I'm a person who, I don't really think that life has hard rules to it in pretty much most aspects of life. I believe that there are tendencies of things. I think that things tend to go a certain way, but they might not. on the 99th time out of 100, it might go a different way. And so as far as creativity, as an act of offering. Creativity is, or creativity as offering itself. I think that for me, in terms of the hypothesis I presented, the clarity that I might be getting out of this is, it's like, well, it's always an offering, but it's just to who is it being offered? Is this something that is being offered to a big range of people, like the public at large? Is this an offering that's maybe just for a select group of people, or is this just an offering maybe even unto ourselves? And between ourselves and the universe, where we say, it's like, okay, this was something for this, and knowing who this is for. I think that might be a useful question in this whole thing, but I do think that it's always our creativity and what we create is always an offering to something. There's always a giving to something that's involved, because I think that it always has to be. It always has to be. Even if I think it's just to ourselves, sometimes we do something creatively that it's like, yeah, no, this one was for me. I needed to do this. But who knows? Something that you just created for yourself one day, you might just find yourself showing it to somebody on some day in the future. It's like, hey, I did this thing. Have a look at it. What do you think? Who knows? But I think that's always a factor, and I don't think we necessarily have to know the answer to that question when we go into it. But I think it can be an interesting question to ask even while we're in the middle of the process of whatever it is, and being like, wait, who is this for? I mean, in some ways I think of, like, entrepreneurs are in a creative field. Building a business is a creative thing to do, and that's one of the most important things that an entrepreneur actually asks themselves. It's like, well, who's this for? Right? Who is this for? Who is this service for? Who is this product for? Right? Who am I giving this to? Who am I offering this to? Right? But I think that in artistic, more sort of artistic leaning fields, we might not necessarily think of it in that kind of way, right? Even though there's definitely a question about audience. I think screenwriters and writers definitely think about, like, well, who am I writing this for? Who is my audience for this, for this movie or whatever it is? And, what do I hope to communicate, to give them in this offering? Like even with this podcast episode that we're recording right now, going into it, there was something that I wanted to try and communicate, which is that, like, please give your creativity to someone. Don't let it just sit and die. Mm-hmm. Whether that's sit and die as just a thought in your head, or just sit and die in a storage box somewhere. Don't let it sit and die. Don't let that, because no one knows unless you share it, and it could resonate with somebody. It could connect with somebody. It could mean something to somebody. It could really mean something to somebody, and we don't know unless you offer it. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And, one example I was sharing with you before is that, like, think of some sort of a beloved, franchise of some kind. Think of some beloved world that some person has done, like, whether you like it or not. Think of someone like Tolkien. I'm going to not say Star Wars because I said Star Wars in our conversation. So we'll just change it up. But it's the same idea applies. Had Tolkien not given the world Lord of the Rings, Tolkien's long since gone. But that world, this universe has done something that's beyond him now. You know, it has this life that now carries on without him. You know what I mean? And just to think of the travesty if he kept his manuscripts, his writings just tucked away, never for anyone to see, just, you know, slowly rotting and withering away somewhere. No one to ever know about.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like that's, and I want people listening to think about that fire that they've got inside them, about what it is they're doing, that work, that passion. Why is yours any less important than that? How do you know that what you have to say, what you have to express is lesser than that? So give it to the world, share it, offer it to us.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, there's some good stuff there. I mean, I think I just one thing I just want to mention before we get into like wrapping this up in beers is just like, I think there is a lot of time that can be spent thinking on what you might get, and I don't think that's a bad thing intrinsically by any means. I do think that you need to know what you want and what you're after in life. I do think that's helpful, but I have found in my life that when you find out what you can give, that's where you're going to realize how valuable you are. It's not through getting, like accumulating and all of that stuff. That's not going to give you really, that's going to give you a false sense of value. But it's like when you start giving and you start seeing the impact of what you give, that's when you're going to see why you matter. Because it's through others, it's through others that we begin to see our impact on the world and what and how our presence actually is relevant and what it does. So, you know, I think that if I could share anything with those hesitant artists out there who are like, well, what if it's not good enough? What if I, you know, blah, blah, blah. Put your attention on a different thing. Instead of worrying about if it's good enough or if it's like, you know, or if you have the skill and or if you're good enough, all that stuff, but focus on what you're trying to do. Like what you think it could do and where it could, like where people might care about it. Because at the end of the day, a lot of this stuff is not so much about whether it was good or not. There's lots of terrible stuff that has been made, and it's made a lot of money. And people have gotten very successful and launched careers out of stuff that is actually pretty lackluster when you actually look at it. But what it did do was it delivered on something, and it gave people something, and it mattered to them for whatever reason. And so when you're looking at what you're creating out there, you know, yeah, it's important. Like, I don't think you should leave yourself out of the equation. I do think you should get in, you should be valued. I don't think this is like, you know, about you just sacrificing yourself for everybody else. I don't think it's about that at all. But I think where you're going to start to realize your value is when you start to focus on what you can give and how you could help people. And if you come from that place, it won't matter if you don't do it so well. You know, you do it the best you can. And it's kind of like a parable that I could maybe give it to is like parenting, right? Like you might not be the best parent in the world, but if you give your kid love, it's so much better than the parent that does all the right things and doesn't. You know what I mean? So focus on what matters. Focus on what you can give that matters. Like focus on these things that are, you know, and then you'll work out the other things as you go, and you'll get better at doing those as you go. And one last thing I'll just say, Evan, you know, I have a tracker, right? I've gotten I write every day. I've written for over 10 years. And every year I used to look at my writing and it'd be like, wow, you wrote over a million words this year. And it's again, I'm over a million. And I think I looked at my monthly now. I get monthly reports because I have all my writing tracked. And it's like every month I'm writing over 100,000 words every single month. And it's just like, man, I have like this whole body of work that's just sitting there. And when you said sitting in storage in bins, I'm like, oh my God, that's me. There's so much stuff I have not shared with the world. And I think like I'm going to take a piece of my own advice here and just look at like, if I'm going to do anything with this stuff, like maybe I focus more on what I would give if by sharing it, because there's a lot of stuff. And I've been really working on, and I can be a bit of a perfectionist, and I've been honing my craft and I've been figuring things out and sorting stuff out. There is a ton of stuff that I just don't share with anybody. And this conversation is actually making me think about that in another light and recognize, yeah, you know what, man, like there's a lot of stuff that you could give and you don't offer it to anybody. And maybe that's worth revisiting. Maybe that's worth like looking at it again and saying like, hey, like if I was going to offer this, could it do something for somebody? Could it give them something? Is there any point in my life where I'd like to have had this shared with me? You know what I mean? And that's been a struggle for a lot of my life, is like, is it good enough? Am I good enough? All of that. I struggle with that, deeply. But sometimes that's really just not what it's about. I'm realizing like, yeah, it isn't about that. It doesn't matter if you're the best. It matters that you have something valuable to give. And if people can find value out of it and it would make their lives better, it would help in some way, and you could share that and give that, then you should. You should really at least consider doing it. So I think I'm going to walk away and definitely think about that. But before I do, Evan, let's talk about some beer. And I'm having one. I don't know if we've had this before. I mean, one of us probably has, maybe, but I couldn't remember, so I got it anyway. This is a Stanley Park Brewing Windstorm West Coast Pale Ale.
Oh yeah,
yeah, and yeah, it's been a nice solid beer. I was just like, I want a pale ale, and I'm back in BC right now, and just getting a nice Stanley Park brew. I was like, this is the one. Let's do it. You know what I mean?
yeah.
So anyway, I mean, I'm not sure if I personally had this one on the podcast, but I give it a thumbs up. It's been a solid beer for this talk. So yeah, there you go. How
It's
about
a
you?
good one. Yeah, I am also drinking a pale ale. This one's from Hoyne Brewing Company, and this one is called. I couldn't resist it when I saw this. It's called the Wolf Vine. Wolf Vine Wet Hopped Pale Ale. I don't really know what that means for it to be wet hopped. Doesn't give any explanation for it, but it's super tasty. Oh wait, actually maybe there is something on here. Find the hop. Sorry, I've got to do this. There's wolf vine, or more commonly, the hop plant, shares with its namesake one rather interesting trait after decidedly unthreatening beginning to life. Upon maturity, each species stakes their claim, and with neither mercy nor conscience will tirelessly strive for and usually achieve total territorial domination. Okay, well, that didn't really reveal anything, so sorry, everybody. I thought it was going to tell me something about what this wet hopped idea was. But anyhow, it's been great. When I took my first sip of it, I was like, this is fan-frickin-tastic. Really good. Like delicious flavor, easy to drink. Yeah. So
nice.
I'm a fan. That's a winner.
Awesome. Well, I'm gonna wrap up my side, and then I'm gonna pass it to you.
All right.
So yeah, I think as we've been going through this conversation, the thing that I'm really kind of getting to here at the end for me is, by focusing on how the act of creating is like giving, it's another way to get the attention off of myself and onto what I'm doing, and what I'm doing might mean for someone else or something else outside of me. And I think where a lot of my hangups have been in my career, and probably why I haven't created or launched or shared, let's just say launched or shared as much as I probably could have, is because I get very much caught up in my own world about like, I need to do this, I need to do that, is this good enough, blah, 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 perfectionism, all this stuff. And, you know, and I realize, it's not about half-assing it or putting it out there with like a lower quality by any means, but I think it's also about not being so precious about everything, and recognizing that sometimes it's better to look just look outward instead of inward with your work so much, and I think that's what I'm going to try to do a little bit more, um, is just offer more in terms of what I can offer, and stop worrying so much about if my offer is the best thing that is available or the best I could ever do. Because the truth is, I'm always getting better, and what I have to offer is always getting better. And at a certain point, it's just like, look, I can help you with that, or I can give you this, or I could show you that, or whatever. I might not be it might not be perfect, might not be the best at it, but if you want a little help, I can do that. You know what I mean? Like that's a good way, I think, to start with a lot of this stuff, as opposed to just like, wait, I got to get this figured out and that figured out, and it has to be perfect, and it has to be totally and it's just never going to be. You know what I mean? And so I'm going to really kind of look at that. I think as I'm walking away, and if anyone else is listening and they connect with that, yeah, I mean, I just say, like, look at the stuff that you have to offer, and maybe it doesn't have to be totally done for you to share it yet. Maybe it can still be a work in progress to some degree, and maybe through sharing is the way to bring it to that level. And so that's what I'm going to really look at walking away from this podcast, because I've walked into this not really knowing what I was doing, but kind of coming to the recognition that the giving element is a part of the final stage of anything, and it's a necessary stage. Mm-hmm. And so you're trying to get to that final stage before you give it. I don't know if you really can. So you have to kind of look at it and go, okay, like, I'm at those stages where it's ready to share, or it would be appropriate to share to some degree. Let's just be bold. Let's put it out there. Let's and if I get feedback and needs work, I go back to the workshop and I work on it, and I come back again, but if you never put it out there, you never get the feedback, you never see the impact. I mean, what do you really know? So that's what I'm kind of walking away with today.
Yeah, the whole work in progress. It's like, it's always a work in progress, until you just decide that you're done.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I think it can be useful to just always think it's like, well, it's just continuously a work in progress. It's not done until you say, right? Yeah, man, this has been a really fascinating conversation. What we give, what we offer the world is, and what we do, what we decide to do, what we choose to do, what we choose to create is so, it doesn't stand alone on an island. It's why we choose to do certain things, whether we are actually fully aware, although that's kind of a dubious claim to say that we are fully aware of why we do the things that we do. But, it's always relational. It's always in relationship to the world, with the world. So it only makes sense for us to think about this aspect of giving with what we're doing, and this aspect of offering with what we're doing, because it is inextricably linked to all that is, really. If you really want to go down the rabbit hole with it and you really think about it, yeah, like what you choose to do is connected to all of human history. We carry all of that with us. And so we want to offer what we have in that way, because so much has been offered to us unwittingly and consciously as well. And something else that came to my mind was something that came up in one of our conversations over this past weekend, which for me, this whole aspect of our sort of evolution, or going from that sort of picking the gold up off of the ground to having to dig for it, which we were talking about age, I guess, to put it bluntly. We were talking about age, and from younger to older, being a kid, being a child, being a younger person to becoming an adult. And something that occurred to me was that, like, well, really what's the difference, because there's something very beautiful about that young age and that purity and that just picking the gold, like all of this gold that's just on the ground, and then a lot of people lose this sort of thing, and there's a maturity that happens with the love and the passion and the creative pursuit. There's a maturity that happens there. And we don't want to lose the love, but we do need to mature. And so what is that maturity? And I think that's connected to this aspect of giving. And for me, that adult part of creativity is saying, what pain do I want to take responsibility for in the world? What is a pain in the world that I want to take responsibility for through my work, through what I'm doing? A pain that actually has some meaning to me, that I can offer something to. I think that is possibly, because I know I'm just throwing this one in at the end, but I know I think that this is possibly an essential element in how we mature in our creativity, is through that willing taking of responsibility over something. Through the love that we have, we can offer something to the world that connects us to each other and to our lives in a more meaningful way. Thank you for listening in on our conversation today. We hope you found something helpful that you can carry forward with you. Head over to our website, wayoftheartist.com, for more free exclusive material and learn about the show. If you haven't already, please support us by subscribing to the show, sharing it with people you know, and keeping compassionate, creative conversation going.